Like all of the people I've heard from, although it's only January, I'm already tired of the campaign rhetoric that's been shoved down my throat by the news media. I'm ready for it to all be over, and it's hardly begun. There are a good number of candidates who have thrown their hats into the ring, some of them quite popular and others just doing their best to hang on. And that got me to thinking about what it is that makes a candidate popular with the public. Some would say a good slogan is critical to a successful campaign. Campaign candidates depend on slogans to get their point across in just a few short, hopefully memorable words. But one has to wonder. 250 branding, marketing, and advertising professionals who were asked to select and rank the slogans of the presidential candidates ranked Donald Trump's Make America Great Again number 19, although he's the front-running Republican candidate. And Mike Huckabee's number 1 ranking From Hope to Higher Ground doesn't seem to have done much for him in the polls. Excuse me. So then I got to looking at campaign promises. A lot of former presidents have made some pretty bold campaign promises. In 1971, Nixon declared war on cancer, stating, "I will ask for an appropriation of an extra $100 million to launch an intensive campaign to find a cure for cancer." In 1983, Reagan focused on a strategic defense initiative calling on scientists to render nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. 6 years later, George Bush, the first one, decided to eradicate drugs, promising the scourge will stop. With few exceptions, most of the promises of former presidents remain unfulfilled. And that hasn't kept current candidates from also offering what Nancy Rockwell calls political salvation, an end to the troubles that afflict us as a nation and the beginning of better days. Their strategies vary from more health care to less, and from walls along our nation's border to carpet bombing civilian areas occupied by ISIS. And it's in the midst of these campaign strategies that our gospel reading has Jesus giving what sounds like his own inaugural address filled with campaign promises. We find Jesus in his hometown synagogue reading from the 61st chapter of Isaiah. "The Spirit of our God is upon me, because the Most High has anointed me to bring good news to those who are poor. God has sent me to proclaim liberty to those held captive, recovery of sight to those who are blind, and release to those in prison, to proclaim the year of our God's favor." In addressing the synagogue, Jesus was saying something very important. He was saying that poor and marginalized people mattered in God's eyes. And if they mattered in God's eyes, they mattered in his eyes too. A lot of attention has been given to the Black Lives Matter movement over the past year, which has led to a pushback that all lives matter, not just black lives. Some people feel that all the focus on black lives implies they matter more than others. But I don't think that's the case at all. I think the movement is saying that the way our culture treats people of color would make one think that black lives don't matter, at least not as much as white lives. And so attention is being called to the situation with a slogan that says black lives do indeed matter. Jesus was doing something similar when he stood up and read to the synagogue that poor people matter, captives matter, the blind matter, and so do the imprisoned. Yes, all lives matter, but the way the marginalized and oppressed are treated would make one think that their lives don't matter as much as other lives. And Jesus was saying they do matter. They matter greatly. So who are the people that Jesus was talking about? The good news that he had been anointed to proclaim to the poor. Who are the poor today? Well, certainly the poor are the homeless people we pass on the street with all of their belongings tucked in a backpack or shopping cart. The poor are the underemployed and those who can't afford health care. But the poor is also the socially poor person who doesn't seem to have the skills for making friends. The poor is the spiritually poor person who may have plenty of money but is afraid of letting it go to help someone in need. The poor is the emotionally poor person who has never learned to love himself or herself, or the one who is so afraid of being hurt they refuse to love anyone else. What will we do to bring good news to these who are poor? And the captive. Who are the captives today? People who are imprisoned are certainly captive. But does it end there? Is not the addict held captive to his or her drug of choice? Isn't the wife or child chained to a life of domestic violence, captive to physical and emotional abuse? Isn't the sex trafficking of teenagers nothing more than a form of modern-day slavery? And aren't the spirits of LGBT folk held captive when they are bullied by religious fundamentalists whose weapons are shame, wrath, and condemnation? And how will we proclaim liberty to these who are being held captive? When Jesus proclaimed recovery of sight to those who were blind, it most certainly meant those who were visually impaired. But does it end there? What about others who have physical challenges or ailments? And what about people who can see with their eyes but are unable to see the possibilities of a future with hope? They too are blind. And I would say the person who is unable to recognize the sacred value of himself or herself is blind. Just as blind as the one who can't see that sacred value in others. So how will we proclaim recovery of sight to those who are blind? And the imprisoned. Some Bible translations say oppressed. Who is oppressed today? The oppressed is anyone who has been denied the chance to make something better of their lives. The oppressed are gays and bisexuals and lesbians. They are the trans community and women in the workplace. They are people of color, the elderly, the very young, and people with physical and mental challenges. And how will we set these oppressed people free? After Jesus read from the scroll, he sat down and gave his sermon. A sermon, by the way, which was much shorter than any one you can ever hope to hear from me. His sermon was just one sentence. Today, in your hearing, this scripture passage is fulfilled. I interpret that to mean he had accepted his mission. He embraced it. He was in effect saying, I accept the calling to make a difference. If we call ourselves Christians, then that means we embrace the same ideals that Christ embraced. If we are the church, then we share the same values as Jesus. And so that means we are also committed to bringing good news to those who are poor, proclaiming liberty to those who are held captive, and recovery of sight to those who are blind, and release to those in prison. But how will we do it? Well, first, we must choose to believe in ourselves, to believe that we are indeed God's beloved and that God is well pleased with us, regardless of what anyone else may say. And after we embrace and affirm ourselves, we are then free to be a part of a church whose mission is in sync with that of Jesus Christ. I like to think that we are just such a church. And then we need to support the mission of the church with our prayers, our energy and time, and our financial resources. We don't pick or choose one of the above, but we do them all to the degree that we are able. God's light was revealed through Jesus as a call to do justice. It's up to us to ensure that God's light continues to shine in the world by taking up that call to do justice. May it be so in your life and in mine today and every day. May we be the light of God shining brightly in a world hungry for liberty and justice for all. And in so doing, may we fulfill the word and the will of God. Amen.